Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today, March 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're very excited for today's conversation with Jesse Rothkopf of Stellar Services. But before we get that underway, we just want to thank our patron members. As you can see here, that and our organizational members is a growing list. We are very grateful for their continued support of programs like this and our recent summit, our newsletter, etc. Before we get into today's program, I just want to highlight next week's ALN Thursday at 3. So that's next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. We have Daniel Ortiz, and it'll be a special session because the later part of the program will be in Spanish for our ALN Espanol audience. And with that, I will just say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So join the conversation with Jesse and Mike today by submitting any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat or using the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. And with that, I will introduce Mike Ordinero, Executive Director for the ALN.
Thank you, Nick. And Nick is joining us from Oregon. How's the weather out there?
Oh, it's lovely. It felt yesterday like summer had already come and my eyes are itchy, and it's very different than Wyoming, where I'm normally calling it from.
I'm from Chicago, where we had 2 days of spring over the weekend, and now we're back into winter with rain and cold to the bone weather. Jesse, where are you calling from?
Charleston, South Carolina.
And I'm sure it's just beautiful there, right?
Yeah, I think spring was either yesterday or part of this morning. It goes straight from winter into summer around here. I think we blew through spring earlier.
So it's good to have you back. Jesse has joined us in the past. He was instrumental in having LCE become an ALN member, and he is now at Stellar Services, which I understand works with LCE on many projects. But Jesse, can you tell us a little bit about Stellar Service and what you're able to do with them now?
Sure. Stellar Services, it's been in business. We're a technology firm focused on asset management for public infrastructure clients. And we've been in business for about just shy of 30 years now. The company got its start as a minority business enterprise and disadvantaged business enterprise, and built up quite a reputation in the market for helping projects implement software in asset management, enterprise project performance management or construction management, enterprise content management, and just PMO support. Those are our 4 main categories. And all of our customers are public infrastructure, airports, seaports, transit agencies, school systems, government, state and local government clients, and some federal clients.
But I understand you've got a more strategic role. What are you doing at Stellar?
So the role here is vice president for the asset management group. But as the company has grown, some of those certifications for minority business and disadvantaged business we've outgrown, or we've graduated from those programs. So we're really looking at changing our business model a little bit to become more involved in prime contracting. We already do quite a bit of prime contracting, but to really focus the business more on being the prime contractor and kind of driving benefit for the customers rather than just filling in a couple of roles in those seats. We're really helping them improve their asset management program.
And what do you see yourself doing?
Alliances are a big part of this. We work with a lot of the enterprise asset management firms, the ERP firms, the construction management software firms. We're implementing that. The biggest thing I think right now is where in the past we may have put 1 or 2 people on a construction management project, implementing that software. Now we're looking at that and saying, well, if you're building a new asset, a new public infrastructure asset like an airport or a new line for a transit agency. First, you got to build it, but then eventually it goes into operations and maintenance. So let's close the loop on that entire life cycle and go from construction management all the way through asset management, bring those two pieces together as part of an overall asset management program. And the enterprise content management fits in there also. As you're building job plans, as you're collecting, the design documentation, the P&IDs, all those things they become part of the asset management program. So the big change is really closing the loop around that life cycle of those assets and bringing it in as one value add option for the customer.
So Stellar Services really benefits from ISO 55001 4.2, involve all relevant stakeholders. It sounds like that's part of what you're doing, is involving all the relevant stakeholders.
Absolutely. We have to, instead of just looking at one department, we're looking at the total enterprise and helping them build that culture around asset management and using that technology to help align the people and the processes there with the physical assets.
You just said the magic word that we've really been hearing over and over for starting with our event last year and all through the beginning of this year, the culture, the asset management culture. The tools and processes are proven. People know that this works. It's a matter of having a leader who is willing to transform an organization, and that requires a cultural adjustment. How do you address that when you're working on projects?
Oh, yeah. So this is something that you and I, we talked about in one of our previous meetings. If you're leading a public infrastructure organization, I believe it's the leader's responsibility not to know every aspect of the asset management program, not to be down into the details of the asset class strategies and things like that, but it is their role and their responsibility to build that culture, to nurture that culture of asset management, to make sure that the entire organization sees their role in actually developing and executing against an asset management program, and making sure that there's a clear line of sight through the whole organization to between each person's job and the asset management program.
Now you are tasked with helping leaders establish this culture change. How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times it really requires a lot of one-on-one discussions with these leaders. We have to get in and start talking to them. There's a couple ways that we approach the discussion. One of the things that we look at is how is, or what defines a culture within an asset-intensive organization. I know we don't typically use some slides, but you and I spoke, and there might be just one.
If this is the time to show those slides, that's fine.
All right, I'm going to throw those up on the screen. Just one second. Let's do that, and share we go, and presentation mode. I'll try presentation mode again. There we go. All right. Is that showing?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're trying to define the culture, or when you're talking to the leaders of an organization, I try to get the focus on, what really helps to define that culture in your organization. There's the people. These are all the stakeholders. It's the workforce. It's the customers. It may be the regulators. There's the processes on how you maintain your assets, the processes on how you do capital delivery, the processes on how you do your planning, the technology, which may be your asset management systems, your ERP systems, and of course, if we're talking about asset-intensive businesses, organizations, the physical assets themselves. So if you look at these kind of 4 pillars, and then across those 4 pillars, you look at the business architecture. How does that organization make decisions? How do they decide where to spend, their next $10 million on training, on new assets, on new systems? Do people get to make decisions out in the field to defer maintenance, or do they have to follow, the exact processes, the standard operating procedures? That's all in the business architecture. And then you look at the technology architecture. How do our systems support us? Are our systems actually helping our workforce be more productive, get more work done on time, or are they a drag, as they often are in some public infrastructure clients, where they're slowing us down? People are having to enter information in multiple systems. They go back and forth, and we want to get them out of the computer and more times, turning wrenches. And then the information architecture is how do we share information across the enterprise? How do we share it between different systems, between different departments, sometimes between different agencies? So if you look at the business architecture, the technology architecture, and the information architecture across these columns, that kind of gives you an idea of the enterprise architecture. Now, I put a little parentheses there, asterisk light. We could get into really deep discussions about enterprise architecture and TOGAF and the standards, and that could get a little academic. But when talking to a leader in a public infrastructure organization, just try to focus on this picture, because it presents a way for them to see how these 4 columns and these architectures really create what is the culture of the organization. And then if you want to break that down, this is my last slide. If you want to break that down into the addressable elements of that organization, you can look at it this way. If you're talking about the intersection of people and business architecture, that might be talking about the culture itself, or the roles and responsibilities. Or if you're talking about people in technology architecture, how do my people out in the field or my people in the back offices, anybody in the organization, get the data that they need to make the right decisions? And people in information architecture, that intersection is really about where do I get analytics, not just analytics for analytics purpose, but analytics that I can action, that I can make good decisions on to improve the business. You talk about processes, and here you got standard operating procedures. If you're talking about information, you're talking about data modeling down here. Or if you're talking about information and technology, it might be about data governance. The idea here is that every organization is going to have their strong points and their weak points in each of these 12 boxes. And when you're building an asset management program, you sort of have to build those bricks, foundation brick by brick. You can't just build it all on technology and then expect the people to be caught up with that. It'll start to tip over. You need to build a foundation where it's coming up almost at the same time. You're building those competencies throughout the organization. And that's usually where we bring that conversation to the C-suite.
I can see this really clarifies the conversation. So that's good to share. I'm glad we have this on record now, to tell you the truth, because many of our speakers have been talking about culture, but none of them have outlined so clearly a path to establishing understanding of advancing the culture with an asset management project. So thank you for sharing this.
Thank you.
You can stop sharing this now, and let's go to a question that Chris Golly, who is the head of the U.S. tag for his remaining term. Are there differences in implementing asset management in public and private enterprises that you have found?
Yes, that's a really interesting question. So for sure, when you're dealing with a private industry, we could go into the C-suite and say, all right, you're going to improve your asset management program, and this is the impact of your bottom line. Here's where you're going to make more money. Here's where you're going to increase your KPIs and improve the business performance from a profitability point of view. When you go into a public infrastructure organization, profit motive is not always the motive. We talk about how public infrastructure is there to benefit society, to make society flourish. Sometimes it's truly there to help society. Sometimes it's really there as an engine of economic growth. You look at like transit agencies in New York, Washington, Chicago, Los Angeles. Without the transit agencies, business just can't flourish the same way. People can't move around. So the benefits of a strong ISO program, ISO-based program, they could be more focused on profitability for a private sector, more focused on safety, reputation, optimization for the community for public sector.
So airports are an interesting combination of public and private. It's a public facility operated by a city or state or county, but it's serving the private interests of the airlines. So you've been involved in some of those, haven't you?
Yeah, quite a few. Stellar's doing a bunch of work in Atlanta, and in my prior days, some work with Denver, Orlando, Raleigh, Maryland.
So how, in this unique hybrid where you have public client, but serving private companies, how do you find that works?
From an asset management point, it's a good question. From building up the asset management point of view, it's more typical of a public infrastructure organization. They're really looking at it from being good stewards of the public money that goes into that. Now, we talk about the profit motive for some of these organizations. Airports really often become a cash cow for their municipalities. So it's very competitive business, both airports and seaports, to make sure that they get the airlines in there. If they're not taking care of their terminals properly, that airline is maybe going to consider going somewhere else. If that airline is finding, their terminals are kept clean, the customers are happy, and the flow of passengers and cargo and baggage all works because the equipment is working properly, they're more likely to stay there and do that. So it's a little bit of a combination between the profit motive and just being good stewards of public money, I would say.
Okay, so some key performance indicators for airlines are things like on-time takeoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And that might not be the airport's concern. They might be like safety, no accidents, and that's their key performance indicator. So it's a matter of meshing the interests of stakeholders and having measurements to help them both, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And then also for the airports, those of us that are old enough remember, I won't mention the name of the airport, but they put in a new baggage system that just really had some difficulties. And that caused a lot of problems for the passengers and for the airlines. A lot of baggage getting sent to the wrong airports, wrong flights. That's becomes an asset management problem. If you can't connect the right equipment to the right aircraft. Same with, you know, the tugs that move airplanes in and out. How many times have you been pulled up after a long flight and sat at the airplane's parked, but they can't get anybody to move the air bridge over because something's in the way, something's broken, and you know, people just don't like that too much. So it really has to work as a symphony there.
Well, thank you for that. We've got another question. This one is from Chip Knowlton. What are your thoughts on the concept of a digital worker and getting skilled resources skilled in those areas? So I think this is, Chip, if you want to clarify this at all, feel free. But I think what he's talking about is remote workers and the increase of that since COVID, and the challenge in getting people who are skilled in remote working and skilled. Now we're hearing asset managers are really rare. And are you experiencing anything with that?
Sure. I know Chip, great person that's involved in the asset management world. He's been very experienced in this area. And if I know Chip, I think he might be asking, you know, how does digital fit into an asset management program a little bit? In today's world, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you had to execute a job plan, you might go back to a file cabinet, pull up a hard copy of it, make a photocopy of that job plan and any drawings, and then go out to your work site and try to follow the printout that you have. In a digital world, you might even have glasses on that can give you augmented reality where you're actually seeing your asset, but you can, you know, look off to the side and see the procedures to fix that asset or repair that, service that asset. You might have ability from a digital point of view to, while you're out in the field, to pull up a job plan, a lockout, tagout operation, something like that. So the digital world really does change it. And, you know, that's from an asset management point of view, it's not just about that one worker that's going out there. It's about building standard operating procedures, kind of linking in your training so that your workforce understands where to get the information, how to do the work, but where to get the information. And if I want to move into a different role within my organization, what training do I need to do? Do I need to take? All of that gets into the digital side of an asset management program. I'm not sure, Chip, if I answered your question.
He says exactly. Thanks, Jeff. So it's a good thing that you do know Chip, because you were able to interpret the question better than I was. So I was just about to promote Chip to a panelist. Actually, Chip, just say yes in the chat, and we'll let you have some conversation with Jesse also. Jesse, do you know what organization Chip is with?
Chip is with HDR, and we go way back. Chip brought me into this business a long time ago. He was my boss at IBM. So
Chip, we would really love to promote you to panelist, but we don't want to do that unless you say yes. Jesse, since airports are municipal and Stellar's doing a lot of municipal, you've had municipal work. The ALN is launching an ALN local government asset leadership board. We see that interest in asset management increasing dramatically because of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we're looking to put together a pathway for easy on-road ability for municipalities who either haven't had asset management philosophy or culture at all, or who want to improve it. Any advice to the Asset Leadership Network on information that we might want to look into sharing for local governments to improve their asset management?
Oh, okay. So I really want to applaud the Asset Leadership Network's efforts to lobby Congress in the past about, when there were federal grant money for public infrastructure, ALN was instrumental in getting the government to consider asking those recipients of those grants to have some sort of asset management program, to look at ISO 55000 as a standard for that. I think it's, you guys got a nice bullhorn to talk to people in Washington, to the policymakers. And I think if I were to give any advice on what that could be, I would say that, perhaps with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, this is great bill, lots of money out there, but there's also these huge needs out in the field for that money. What I would say is to continue on what you guys have done. If grant recipients are going to get a certain amount of money, they should have some sort of written asset management program. Or if they don't already have a written asset management program, that perhaps a percentage of that first grant should be to establish that written standards-based asset management program within their organization. That would benefit these smaller agencies that don't already have that tremendously. They become better stewards of those grant monies. So either have it or build a written program, and maybe even when a grant is given, that there could be a requirement or an expectation, at least, that grant recipient should be able to come back and say, here's what we did with that from an asset management point of view. That might be, it could be extending the life cycle of the asset. A lot of this money is actually meant for the steel and concrete to make those assets stronger, repair the bridges in Pittsburgh or whatever it is. But it could also be, I've been able to improve the entire life cycle of my network of assets, my asset register, by building this program based on ISO 55000. And there was one other idea that I had, that you and I talked about with leadership. Leadership of these organizations should be somewhat familiar with an asset management program and what it's doing. A grant should maybe have an expectation that the leaders of that organization have the ability to articulate something about asset management program and to drive that culture within the organization.
That's a really good idea, Jesse. I'm glad I asked that question. We hadn't thought about that before, and we'll try to figure out some way to establish a leadership primer or something that helps them quickly get up to speed with what ISO 55001 can do for you. And bringing that around, to culture, you really, circled the wagons very well. It's always a pleasure talking with you. The time flies very quickly in conversation with you. So I think this is a good time to bring Nick back on board. And well, thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and also a big thank you to our organizational members who help make this possible. Our patron members, as well as our other organizational members, really cannot say how grateful we are for their continued support so that we can continue our advocacy efforts. And if you're interested in joining or figuring out how our organizations can work together, please reach out to anyone at the ALN. And with that, I will just say that next week, Thursday at 3 is with Daniel Ortiz, and it will be a special session of ALN Thursday at 3, as the later part of the program will be in Spanish for the ALN Espanol audience. So please let anyone you think might be interested in this program know, and then see that they get there.
So let me just say a few more things about that. The first half, we have so much to learn from our colleagues overseas. And Daniel has been a senior fellow for many years and is leading many ISO 55001 certification programs in South and Central America. So his English portion will be beneficial to those in the US. And then the second half, Cecilia Mowat, who is president of ALN member organization Strategies and Sight, will be talking with Danielle in Spanish, and we'll be able to make that available to our Spanish speaking audience. So thank you to this audience for joining us today with this great conversation with Jesse. Jesse, thank you once again for joining us. Nick, thanks for making everything go smooth, and we'll see you all next week.